Great careers are not accidents, they're journeys built through clarity and intent. In every industry, there are such journeys that reveal true leadership, sacrifice, risk, and purpose. I'm Dirk, and this is The Pitch and the Catch, where we dive into choices, changes, and the careers they create. Welcome. Welcome. Today we're joined by someone who proves that leadership doesn't always happen behind a desk or in front of a crowd. Sometimes it happens in the dirt and under the blazing sun. William Bourdeau is a Marine Corps veteran turned entrepreneur, farmer, and advocate for California's agricultural heartland. As founder and CEO of Bourdeau Farms, he's using technology to push farming into the future. From soil sensors and drones to data analytics that predict market trends before they actually happen. A self-described gentleman farmer, William blends executive insights with hands-on pragmatism, showing how traditional industries evolve through innovation, strategic water management, and cross-sector collaboration. From the Marine Corps to Harris Farms and now multiple ventures, his story is one of discipline, vision, and purpose. It's a reminder that progress and resilience often grow from the ground up. William, welcome to The Pitch and the Catch.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I am very impressed because you're not just, you're a farmer, but you're also in a way, you're taking this to Washington. So you're a politician in a way, probably out of need. You are a real estate developer. You're even a consultant in real estate. Tell us a little bit, or I know we had the brief, but the listener or the viewer didn't have this. What's your stories?
After I got out of the Marine Corps, I wanted to become a businessman. I wanted to learn about business and I wanted to own my own business. And so I went to college. I got my master's in business administration, and then I went to work. I thought this would be a very good way to learn different industries, different types of businesses, and better understand how businesses work. And so
Yes.
I went and worked for a large accounting firm. I audited companies and did taxes. And so I was building kind of a foundation and understand, okay, when you're doing a bunch of people's taxes, you kind of understand how wealth is created. And then when you audit a company, you kind of understand how the businesses run, how the good ones are run and how the bad ones are run. And especially if you stick to the same industry, you can go to several different companies and you know more than probably one of the experts in any one company, because you're seeing how their competitors are doing, how companies do it in other regions. And so I was lucky enough to have some large water districts that I was auditing, and it was fascinating. And I did have some agricultural clients, but I also had casinos and other large businesses and many wealthy individuals. And so that's where I kind of got my foundation. And then I went to work for one of my large clients, and then I was recruited into the agricultural space. But the whole time I wanted to be an owner. I understand how the tax system works. If you're a W-2 employee, you can be paid significant bonuses, but you typically only get about half of it, and you're kind of disappointed. You think you made a bunch of money, and you really didn't. But if you own your own business, you can manage those taxes in a way that allows you to cash flow much better, though it takes, there's a lot more headaches and you have a lot more risk, and but that's what makes life exciting. And so life without any risk is boring. And so I've taken many risks in my life, from risking my life from my country, but I've also more than willing to risk my bank account for making sure that my children have a legacy. And so I think farming is very foundational. I think owning real estate is somewhere where you can grow your wealth. And then also, if you have a crop like pistachios, I mean, they're very hard to get into the business. That's my primary source of income. But I'll explain to you why I grow other things, and that has to do with making sure my pistachios have an adequate water supply. But pistachios are a wonderful crop. They're drought tolerant. They grow primarily in Iran and California. There are some other regions, but we're the largest growing regions. But There are some drawbacks. Some of the drawbacks are barriers to entry, so they're not all necessarily bad, but they take there's a significant investment in terms of buying the land, and then you have to develop the land, then you have to put the water infrastructure in, you have to have a location that has good soil, has proper chilling hours, that it gets cold enough in the winter that the trees will go to sleep. But then the real barrier to entry is it takes 7 years before they produce. And so it's a significant amount of time where you're not bringing in any income and you have these huge capital outlays. But the trees will last forever. And so there are some in my region that
Yes.
are 70, 80 years old and they're still producing. So it's if you can get the financially make it to harvest, you're doing pretty good. And so the reason why I farm other things is because if you want to have a fairly conservative business model, which I do, I don't want to go broke and risk, the farm, is that you have to buy excess land. And the way that our water supply contract works in Westlands Water District, and Westlands Water District is the largest agricultural water district in the state of California, 600,000 acres of some of the most productive farmland in the world. It's highly engineered. All the water comes from aqueducts and then pressurized pipelines. I mean, you turn on your meter and you have a significant amount of water. You can farm tens of thousands of acres if you need to. And so it's a wonderful place to farm. So you do that. And so we're ideally situated. And so, but because we have these water supply disruptions in mostly for political purposes, but we do have droughts. And so you have to manage the way you farm. And so you have this excess land and you fallow it during droughts and you can use some of the groundwater as necessary. But then when we have water in abundance, because California swings between, we have floods and droughts. And so that's why they built the infrastructure that we have, because they understood that our weather is very volatile here in the state of California. And so you have to manage both, because too much water is just as bad as not enough.
Yes.
And so, but because we're being more innovative, we have ways to capture. Like this year, we're having a pretty good rain and snow. We're probably going to be able to have some flood releases and get that water and put it into the aquifer so we can pull it out during a drought. And so, but the reason I farm other things is because I only farm about 1/3 of my total footprint to permanent crops. And then I can grow all lots of other wonderful row crops when we have sufficient water supply. I recently grew carrots. I had a joint venture with Bolt House, and we grew the baby carrots that everybody loves to have. They're easy. They're just a wonderful product. But I can grow lots of different things. In our region, we can grow upward of 200 different high value crops. And so it's a unique
Yeah.
region that has unique weather, unique soil types, and it's just highly productive. And so we measure it. We measure our productivity in terms of our yields, and we can compete with anyone in the world.
Yes. Because you've mentioned it a few times, there is this emotional part of what you do. You mentioned it's important for neighbors, for community, for our families, and for children. What role does the community and the people play in what you do on an everyday basis?
You need your neighbors to help you out in times of need, and you do the same for them. And I think we built that culture over the last 100 years. And I think, and I'm glad that we've retained much of that culture, where
Yes.
community is a very integral part of our success in terms of labor supply, in terms of all the different things you need in terms of trucking, and in terms of equipment, in terms of chemicals and fertilizers and all these different things, all the different inputs that are required to produce a safe, affordable, nutritious food supply. We live out in the country, and so we rely on our neighbors. And so when you have people that your children play sports with, you see them in church, and they want to work, but we're saying, well, we don't have the water, we can't farm. Sorry, you don't have a job, because we like to differentiate ourselves. We do have what you would call a migrant workforce. But we think that a much better business model is if you can farm 12 months out of the year and you could keep those people employed so they can advance and make their way through your company and then send their kids to college. I have people that I've worked with in the past that they came here from Mexico. They've worked their way up to be managing large divisions of the companies that I've been associated with. Their children went to UCLA and they're now living the American dream. And so I think it's much better if you can manage it where if we can keep people employed for 12 months out of the year and allow them to have some stability. And so if we have the stability in the water supply, we will definitely have the stability in our labor force. And I think that not only helps the farm, but it also helps the community because some of these rural school districts, when you have the population base fluctuate in high numbers, it's hard to run a successful elementary school when the numbers are so variable. And so you have to look at all these different things and manage them. As a former city council member, I took a great interest in this and I understand how important it is to give back to community.
Yes.
Being a city council member is a thankless job and it's a difficult job and you're managing the resources for many people. And oftentimes people are upset with you over things that are outside of your control. I think they were closing the swimming pool, the public swimming pool. And I got more phone calls about that than some of the very important decisions I had to make. And I had no control with I think it was run through the community college district. It's funny how society works and what make people upset. But I do think it's important that we bring in leaders in the community to make decisions and look into the future and invest in our future and make sure that we not only have successful businesses, but we have thriving communities.
Community being an integral part of success. That's an amazing statement. Now let's go back to the political aspect of it. Apparently, there are people in the state of California that are not part of your
I
community.
don't think so necessarily. I think we're a little there's a few reasons why I think there's a lack of understanding and appreciation for what we do. For number one, we've been highly successful. And so you go to the grocery store and you have abundance. You have all the different things, all the different fruits, nuts, and vegetables, all the different produce, all the different meats and dairy, and all the different things
Yes.
that are very wonderful. And so they haven't seen empty shelves. And so we've been highly successful in providing for the masses. Number two, people used to live on a farm or they used to live by a farm. So they had a better understanding and appreciation for all the challenges that go into farming. Farming is very risky, very capital intensive,
Yes.
and many factors are outside of your control. And so there's often times that you do everything right and you still fail. And that means even when you're successful, it takes a long period of time to get paid. For instance, pistachios, you have to put inputs in for 12 months, you harvest, and it takes another 12 months to sell your product. And so that's 2 years out. You are getting some income in that second year, but to sell the whole crop, it takes about another year. And so those two factors, I think that, and then there's a third one that we haven't done a good enough job telling our story. I think most farmers are good at farming and they don't feel like they need to beat their own chest and toot their own horn and go out there and tell their story. But unfortunately, if you don't do that, other people will take
Mm.
that narrative and twist it for their own self-serving purposes. And I think there is a very vocal minority that 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 capture the dialogue and provide a lot of misinformation. And there are a variety of reasons why people do it. I think there's attorneys that do it because it's a very lucrative profession. And I think there's other advocacy groups that's their job. And so I think if at least in my experience, when you bring elected officials, when you bring the community, even from the metropolitan regions to your farm, and they build a better understanding of all that we do and how we don't mistreat our employees, that they're our friends and neighbors, and we don't apply, harsh poisonous chemicals to the crops, but we do have to manage the pests.
Yes.
And so we're doing it in California, which is highly regulated. And so I think, we should be commended for dealing with all this regulation and still finding a way to succeed.
That's an interesting aspect. When you say you, as the farmers or the community you're in, we haven't done a good enough job to tell our story. I do have to tell you, William, when I listen to you, I buy into your story. It makes a lot of sense for me. From building a community with a stable workforce, supplying the nation with food, with quality food. And I like the point that you say we're highly successful. When you go to the grocery store, and I think everybody can see that, we live in a world of abundance. And that abundance is a sign of our success.
Well, farmers only represent a very small percentage of the population. And then in order to communicate, it's very expensive to effectively communicate with the United States of America, because that's who we need to communicate with, because they're making
Yes.
these decisions. I know, in order to build a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure, you need senators from all the Western United
Mm.
States to agree that this is something that is going to be beneficial for our country. And so I've literally testified before Congress 5 different times. I've helped pass some legislation where we had to overcome a filibuster with one of our own California senators. We're trying to prevent, and this was legislation that I think was highly beneficial for everybody. And so, but it's very hard to get buy-in from all these different people. And then when you can get buy-in from your local elected officials, but because our region is sparsely populated, we have very little representation. And then second off, and then there's so many different ways that you can consume entertainment and
Yes.
media and news these days that is very hard to compete. And so, even though I think some of these issues and our story are highly integral and impacting people's lives, they are more fascinated by things that are just strictly entertainment. And so they don't see the need, they don't feel the impact. I do think, even though if we have some disruptions in our,
Yeah.
our domestic food supply, we can bring food in from overseas. And so I do think that's important, and
Yeah.
and
And because we've gotten,
a very
yeah,
necessary emergency valve. But I don't think it's in anyone's best interest to rely on foreign countries for our necessities.
most likely. Hey, this is because you've mentioned it. How is it like testifying before Congress?
Well, it was interesting. The first time that I did it, I think somebody that was like the Natural Resources Committee, and they had maybe one of our local
Was
city, no, local county supervisors, I believe. And he was set to testify, but he got sick. So they came to me and they said, no one's crazy enough to go testify before Congress on a moment's notice. And I said, okay, how does this work? Oh, you have to have written testimony. And I said, well, I'm going to be on a plane. How am I going to? And they said, no, we'll get that set up for you. And, we'll make sure it's vague enough that they're not going to be prepared for your testimony. And I think the subject matter, so go for it. And so I got there, and I was fairly nervous, but the way that I do things, that I think that it's important that it's not highly scripted, and it's coming from the heart, and very honest and
yes,
believable. And so I didn't even prepare. But I did think, okay, because I had gone in the past, and we've had some general water district general managers that
yeah,
are very
yes,
sophisticated water attorneys, and they've battled it out. And I wanted to try to avoid that. I have this more, philosophy that I believe in America, and I don't want to just, fight my leaders, even though I disagree with them. And so my approach was explaining how I joined the Marine Corps before I was 18 years old, how my grandparents, both my grandmother and grandfather, are buried in Arlington National Cemetery, that I was raised in a family that believed in giving back and service to our country. And so I think with those things said, I kind of put people on their heels just a little bit in terms of attacking me, and they didn't attack. And my testimony was not inflammatory. It was more of a solution based and more supportive of our country. And I think the combination of those things, they didn't come after me.
Nice. Listening to all of those amazing, I don't want to say stories, aspects of your life. Don't be inflammatory, but be solution based. Act with kindness. Be who you are, which we often translate to authenticity, but I like be who you are, be genuine, and have a general attitude of give back. William, is this the success of your leadership so far in your life?
I joined the Marine Corps, which they instill discipline and leadership and integrity and all these things into you. And I was well suited for it, and I had the foundation, and so they honed me, and then I've used those same skills and abilities that I learned through my life,
Yes.
and I apply them to the things that I think are most important. And that's why water supply, I've pivoted to become an expert in that, and testified as an expert in terms of water supply resources and things of that nature. But it's because it is one of the biggest risks we have, and I have much of my net worth tied up in it. And so I have to, and I feel like it's not just good for me, it's good for our country, it's good for our region, it's good for our community. It just makes sense. And so it's not just me focusing on myself and my own family and making sure we have the adequate resources to live the American dream, that it's also highly beneficial to the United States of America and actually the world in some respects. Yes. And so it's something I feel very passionate about, and I can go to bed at night feeling proud of myself, and I can wake up in the morning and with the passion and energy necessary to tackle some of the most insurmountable challenges that we unfortunately face.
Yes. I have two more things. If it was up to you and your community, and I'm really talking content and action, what does the water supply situation in California need?
Find some solutions that benefit everybody, and quit using this as a political wedge to garner votes. And so I think we need to do the right thing. And oftentimes, and that's unfortunately the way our
Yes.
system is, they do things that are popular, and sometimes you need to make decisions that are not necessarily popular, but they're in everyone's best interest. It's like your children, they would want ice cream for every meal, but that's not good for them. And so you have to make a decision and say, well, this might not be popular, but it's in everyone's best interest. And I think we need to do that as a community. We need to say, okay, if you think, we shouldn't just be looking purely at profits, but we also shouldn't just be assuming that, because a farm needs to be profitable, that that's a bad thing. And so we need to support businesses. We need to have a business friendly community, but we also have to recognize that some of these infrastructure projects are generational. And so we could start building it today and my children will benefit from it. And so we need to start making some of these decisions, not only in investing in the right things, but also spending our money wisely. I think we have these large debts and deficits, and those are some of the hardest challenges, because who wants to be the elected official that says we no longer have social security benefits? So, but unless they start making more sound fiscal decisions, that's bound to happen. And so we've been blessed with some of the technology, particularly in the state of California. The Silicon Valley has bailed out the state of California with huge amounts of resources, and that's allowed them to make poor decisions. Because when you have lots of resources, you can think you're making good decisions, but you're often not. And I know that when you have lack of resources, you often make really good decisions because you have to. And so I think we need to start making better decisions and start thinking about the future. We need to get our fiscal house in order, and we need to invest in things that get us a good return and benefit the community.
Yeah. And this is where I think, William, it needs people like you who are deeply rooted in, and I think you have a strong family values, believe in family values in community, deeply rooted in the idea of giving back, and people who have those conversations. This is why I felt like it is amazing to talk to you. I have a very last question, and forgive me for doing this, but I know you can talk hours on end about this. Pistachios. I have to get back to the start of it. I remember during the brief, you and I talked about pistachios, and I was like, is it a superfood? And you're like, it's still a debate.
So pistachios are highly nutritious. They are a superfood. They're a complete protein. And so particularly if you don't eat a lot of meat or poultry or eggs or things of that nature, you can substitute them with pistachios and receive the same amount of nutrition.
Yes.
And so they even improve your metabolism. They're good fat. You actually, I think we had this craze that that fat was bad, and I think that ultimately there are, you know, processed foods that are bad for you, but there are whole foods that have fat, like avocados, pistachios, almonds, these things, they do have a lot of fat, but it's good fat, and your brain needs this fat. And so it's a healthy fat. And so pistachios, and I'm part of the American Pistachio Growers. I'm the treasurer, and I'm on a director, and I'm on the Nutrition Research Committee. And we don't want to just, and I write articles about it, but I like to use the facts because, I don't want people to say, well, you're a
Yes.
pistachio farmer. I disclose that when I'm writing about it. And I say, yes, I have an interest in selling this product, but I also believe in this product. I feed it to my children, give it away to my friends and neighbors. I think it's a wonderful product that is extremely healthy and nutritious. And so, but I do have a financial interest in it. So I'm going to disclose that. But when we're looking at the health benefits, we want a third
Yes.
party university to test it so there could be no misunderstandings or bias involved. And so we want to be able to report the facts and say, oh, they're very good for your eyesight. Wow, that's an amazing benefit. Wow, they're very good for your metabolism. They're very good to combat diabetes. They will help your body so you're not so your metabolism and your body is not just always stuck in burning carbohydrates, but it's starting to burn fat, and you need to become fat adapted. And so this is something that will help you do all those things. And there's so many benefits that I'm not even touching on. And so it's a wonderful product that I think it tastes great. I mean, people love to eat them.
Amazing. After your speech, I feel like going up to my pantry and see if I have some pistachios left from the last grocery run. I'd love to have, that'll be an honor to have the William Bourdeau Farms pistachios. Hey, William, let me close it for the two of us because we could continue talking, but we have to find a formal end. From the Marine Corps to the fields of California's Central Valley, William reminds us that progress and tradition don't have to compete but can grow side by side. His works show what it looks like when business, sustainability, and community, we've talked a lot about community together, all pull in the same direction and go issue by issue. William's leadership is grounded in purpose and proof that the future, in this case of farming, belongs to those who are willing to change while staying rooted in what's most important. And I think that's family, community, people, and love of the country, to be frank. William brings the same discipline from his military background into every field he leaves, and he leaves his mark on, whether it's a business deal, a consulting job, or a new crop cycle. He's not just adapting to change, he's shaping what the next generation of agriculture could look like. William, it was a pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm looking forward to those pistachios.